They were born into castles, crowned in expectation, and scattered across a continent like royal chess pieces. 9 children, 1 queen, and a family web so vast it stretched from Buckingham Palace to the blood-soaked trenches of World War I. But what happened after the portraits were painted, after the weddings, wars, and whispers? This isn't just the story of Queen Victoria's children. It's the unraveling of an empire written in marriage contracts, medical mysteries, and monarchs gone rogue. Whatever happened to Queen Victoria's children? Let's open the nursery door and watch history grow up. Before we dive in, if royal drama, forgotten dynasties, and history's wildest bloodlines are your thing, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Also, real quick, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Midnight deep dive, lunch break in Lisbon? We see you. Let's roll. 1. Victoria, Princess Royal, 1840 to 1901. She was the firstborn, the one who carried the weight of legacy like a crown made of thorns and porcelain. Born in 1840, Victoria Adelaide Mary Louisa, known in the family as Vicki, arrived with a double burden. Daughter of the Queen of the British Empire and first child of the royal experiment called Victoria and Albert. And from the beginning, expectations clung to her like ivy on stone. Albert, her father, saw Vicki as the living blueprint of his dreams. Liberalism, German idealism, constitutional monarchy, all that good stuff. He trained her like a future philosopher queen. Languages, politics, art, science. This wasn't just a princess. This was an intellectual project. And Vicki, she thrived. A bookworm with steel in her spine, fluent in Greek by age 10, playing chess in French, probably while composing piano sonatas. Then came the export. At 17, she married Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia, a union designed less for love and more for empire tinkering. Together, they were supposed to usher in a golden age of German liberalism, a dream couple. Enlightened rulers, she even managed to fall in love with him, which was almost a bonus. But what Vicki stepped into wasn't a warm bath of progressivism. It was the ice-cold swamp of Prussian militarism, where Bismarck ruled the shadows and liberalism was treated like a bad rash. Frederick, her husband, did become emperor for 99 days. Then he died of throat cancer. And their son, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the mustache-twirling, saber-rattling, mother-blaming wrecking ball of the First World War. Vicki adored him, feared him, fought with him, lost to him. She watched helplessly as the liberal dream turned reactionary nightmare and her own flesh and blood became the face of the coming storm. In 1901, the same year her mother died, Vicki passed away from cancer, unloved by the Prussians, unheeded by her son, and half forgotten by the empire that made her. But her story? It was just the prologue, because the next child wouldn't just inherit titles, he'd inherit the entire throne. 2. Albert Edward, 1841 to 1910. He was the heir, and for nearly 60 years that's all he was. Albert Edward, known to the family as Birdie, spent most of his life waiting for his moment, for his crown, and for his mother to stop being immortal. Born a year after Vicki, Birdie entered the world with a face that would eventually become the public mask of British royalty. Mustachioed, plump, genial, and oddly magnetic. But as a child, he was a disappointment to his parents, especially to Prince Albert. Where Vicki was sharp, Birdie was soft. He preferred riding and parties to Plato and parliamentary reform. This infuriated Albert, who seemed determined to squeeze his son into the mold of a continental intellectual king. Tutors were hired, schedules were packed, reprimands were frequent. None of it really worked. By his 20s, Birdie had cultivated a different kind of education. He learned how to charm crowds, keep gossip columnists busy, and navigate the salons of Paris and Vienna with the grace of a man who understood power didn't always come from books. It came from being seen. After a long apprenticeship under his mother's shadow, Birdie finally became King Edward VII in 1901. He was 59 years old. His reign lasted just 9 years, but he made them count. The Edwardian era became a gilded, gleaming pre-war sunset, a time of luxury, diplomacy, and the slow unraveling of old empires. He reinvented the monarchy's public image, acted as a human bridge between Europe's royal families, and smoked about 20 cigars a day while doing it. He wasn't brilliant, but he was brilliant at being royal. He left behind a legacy of ceremony and image, and a son, George V, who would take the throne into the Great War. But while Birdie partied and paraded his way through Europe, one of his sisters was living a very different royal life, quiet, devoted, and ultimately tragic. Her name was Alice, and she brought something into the bloodline that no one saw coming. And that's only child number 2. If you're already hooked, and let's be honest, who isn't when empires and family feuds collide, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this royal roller coaster. Also, hit the comments and tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Are you deep in a midnight binge or casually royal during your coffee break? We're tracking time zones like royal marriages. 3. Alice, 1843 to 1878. She was the 3rd child and the first to leave quietly. Alice was the kind of royal who disappears into footnotes until you look closer. Born in 1843, she grew up with all the usual trappings of Windsor life: palaces, piano lessons, and a father who turned parenting into a personal enlightenment project. Like Vicki, Alice was intelligent, curious, and emotionally deep, but unlike Vicki, she was not destined for thrones or headlines. She was destined for heartbreak and something far more lasting. In 1862, Alice married Louis of Hesse, a relatively minor German prince. The match was affectionate but modest by royal standards. Together they settled in Darmstadt, where Alice didn't just play duchess. She got to work. When her adopted home was hit by war and outbreaks of illness, Alice rolled up her sleeves. Literally. She studied nursing, organized hospitals, and corresponded with Florence Nightingale herself. Her work was practical, unfussy, and ahead of its time. But behind the compassion, something darker crept in. Alice had inherited more than her father's earnestness. She carried a hidden mutation, the now infamous royal disease, hemophilia. The gene passed to her son, Friedrich, who died young from internal bleeding after a fall. His death crushed her, but the mutation didn't stop there. Through Alice, hemophilia would spread across European royal houses, from Spain to Germany to, most fatefully, Russia. It would haunt the Romanovs. It would shake empires. And it started here in a quiet duchy with a kind woman and a sick child. Alice died young, at just 35, after nursing her own family during a diphtheria outbreak. One by one, her children fell ill, and when her youngest daughter died, Alice, already weakened, followed within days. She left behind 7 children and a shadow in Europe's bloodstream. And as her legacy seeped through royal veins, her younger brother Alfred was busy carving out his own strange path, one that would end with a German duchy, a Russian wife, and a royal identity crisis. 4. Alfred, 1844 to 1900. If Victoria and Albert had one child who defied the script entirely, it was Alfred. Born in 1844, Alfred was the 2nd son, a spare by royal design, but not by temperament. He was practical, reserved, and drawn to the sea like a man escaping something. At just 12 years old, he joined the Royal Navy, making him the only one of Victoria's sons to live a real military life from the bottom up. While his siblings studied statecraft and suffered court drama, Alfred climbed the naval ranks, earned real respect, and spent years stationed around the British Empire. He didn't seem to crave the spotlight, but it found him anyway. In 1874, Alfred married Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna of Russia, daughter of Tsar Alexander II. It was a high-profile match with built-in tension. Maria saw herself as royalty, imperial to the bone, and never quite warmed to the British branch of the family. Their union was cold, but politically useful. They had children, endured each other, and lived lives that drifted more parallel than intertwined. Then in 1893, everything changed. Alfred's uncle, the childless Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, died, and Alfred was next in line. So the naval officer became a German duke, trading battleships for barons and English for aristocratic High German. It was a strange switch. One moment he was a British prince with a Russian wife. The next he was ruling a small German duchy with a foot in every royal court and loyalty to none. His health declined toward the end of the decade, and in 1900, Alfred died, leaving his duchy to his nephew and his legacy floating somewhere between empire and exile. But where Alfred fled into ships and strategy, his younger sister Helena stayed firmly grounded, anchored in nursing, charity, and a very unglamorous corner of royal life. 5. Helena, 1846 to 1923. If Alfred was a royal sailor and Alice was a royal nurse, Helena split the difference, without leaving dry land. Born in 1846, Helena, nicknamed Dus Ländchen by the family, was not raised to dazzle. She wasn't the eldest, the heir, or the favorite, but she became, quietly and steadily, the most useful of Queen Victoria's daughters. Helena married Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein in 1866. It wasn't a wildly romantic match, nor a politically explosive one. Christian was older, mildly controversial due to his German roots, and not exactly overflowing with ambition. But Victoria approved, and Helena was loyal to the job. And her job, it turned out, was everything her mother didn't want to do. Helena became a working royal decades before it was fashionable. She championed causes like women's education, hospital reform, and nursing standards at a time when royal patronage for such things was considered quaint. She was a founding member of the British Red Cross and a relentless advocate for the Royal Nursing Institute. Unlike her more dramatic siblings, Helena didn't marry into empires or die young or start wars. She just did the work. For decades. There were tensions, of course. Her German marriage alienated some British courtiers, and her mother's controlling nature stifled her independence. But Helena remained in the thick of palace life long after others faded. When Victoria died in 1901, Helena continued attending public functions, pushing for nursing reforms, and staying just visible enough to be remembered. By the time she passed away in 1923, she had outlived 6 of her 8 siblings. She had watched the British Empire hit its high water mark and felt the tide start to pull back. But the royal story wasn't done unraveling, because the next daughter, Louise, wouldn't be content with charity work and quiet duty. She wanted art, she wanted freedom, and she took it all the way to Canada. 6. Louise, 1848 to 1939. She was the wild card. Born in 1848, Princess Louise Caroline Alberta was everything a Victorian daughter wasn't supposed to be: independent, artistic, and far more interested in marble than monarchy. While her sisters were marrying German princes and nursing sickbeds, Louise wanted a chisel and a studio. Queen Victoria, famously suspicious of individualism, didn't know what to make of her. Louise was trained as a sculptor, not just for show. She studied at the National Art Training School and became a working artist, a royal who exhibited publicly, took commissions, and signed her work just Louise. One of her most famous pieces, a statue of Queen Victoria, still stands outside Kensington Palace today. But artistry wasn't her only rebellion. She also broke with tradition in marriage. In 1871, Louise married John Campbell, Marquis of Lorne, an aristocrat, yes, but a commoner by royal standards. This was unusual, scandalous even. The match was meant to symbolize a more modern monarchy, but it was also a personal choice. The marriage had its struggles, emotional distance, conflicting ambitions, but it opened doors neither of them expected. In 1878, Lorne was appointed Governor-General of Canada, and Louise became the viceregal consort. Suddenly, the 5th daughter of Queen Victoria was riding sleds through Ottawa, organizing charities in Halifax, and attending art galas in Montreal. She wasn't just tolerated, she was celebrated. Cities and provinces were named in her honor. Alberta? That's Louise. Regina, the capital of Saskatchewan? Her idea. Canada adored her. She adored the escape. Back in Britain, Louise remained an enigmatic figure, politically cautious but socially daring, loyal to her family but distant from court life. She never had children. She lived through 2 world wars. She died in 1939, the last of Victoria's daughters. But while Louise was sculpting her legacy in stone and snow, her younger brother Arthur was trading medals, inspecting regiments, and becoming one of the most quietly powerful royals of the era. 7. Arthur, 1850–1942. He was the soldier prince, the one who did exactly what he was supposed to, and then some. Born in 1850, Prince Arthur was Queen Victoria's 3rd son and 7th child. From the beginning, he was marked for the military, not just because it suited him, but because it gave him purpose in a family that was rapidly running out of crowns to hand out. Arthur entered the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich, trained as an officer, and never looked back. He served in India, Ireland, Egypt, South Africa. Promotions came steadily, not because he was royal, but because he was competent. Arthur reached the rank of Field Marshal and eventually became Commander-in-Chief of the British Army in Ireland. His career spanned decades, and he earned a reputation for discipline, diplomacy, and not making scenes. In 1899, he was made Duke of Connaught. 2 years later, his mother died, and Arthur, who had always served the monarchy, was about to serve the empire. From 1911 to 1916, he was Governor-General of Canada. Like his sister Louise before him, Arthur found a second home in the vast, complicated sprawl of the Dominion. He toured, he listened, he hosted. And when the First World War broke out, he was in uniform, inspecting troops and offering calm reassurance as the empire trembled. His wife, Princess Louise Margaret of Prussia, had died in 1917. His children had grown. His role, like the world around him, was fading. But Arthur stayed sharp well into his 90s. He lived through the fall of 4 empires, the deaths of all his siblings, and the rise of a modern, media-saturated monarchy he would have barely recognized. When he died in 1942, it was the end of an era. Almost. Because there was still one brother left. One who had inherited something none of the others did. A royal disease and a royal tragedy. 8. Leopold, 1853 to 1884. He was the delicate one, and everyone knew it. Born in 1853, Leopold George Duncan Albert was Queen Victoria's 8th child and youngest son. From the earliest days, he was different, bright, bookish, and physically fragile. What no one understood at the time was that Leopold had hemophilia, the bleeding disorder that would come to define not only his life, but the medical legacy of the British royal family. He was the first male in the family clearly diagnosed with it. The royal disease, now known to be a mutation in the F9 gene, turned the slightest bump or fall into a potential emergency, and in the 19th century there was no treatment. Only caution, fear, and pain. But Leopold refused to disappear. Denied a military career, he turned instead to books, ideas, and people. He studied at Oxford, befriended writers and intellectuals, and immersed himself in philosophy and the arts. Victoria tried to keep him close, physically and emotionally, but Leopold pushed for independence, and in 1882 he shocked the court by marrying Princess Helena of Waldeck and Pyrmont. It wasn't just a love match. It was a statement that even a sickly prince could live, love, and leave a legacy. He and Helena had 2 children. Their son, Charles Edward, would grow up to inherit the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Leopold's share of the royal web. But that story would turn dark in the 20th century when Charles aligned himself with the Nazi regime. It was a sharp, tragic twist for a line that began in courage. Leopold died at just 30, after a fall led to internal bleeding. His life was short, yes, but in it, he managed to challenge every assumption about disability, duty, and the limits of royal expectations. And he wasn't the last, because the final chapter of Victoria's family saga belonged to the youngest daughter, the editor, the loyal one, Beatrice. 9. Beatrice, 1857 to 1944. She was the last, and Queen Victoria never let her forget it. Born in 1857, Princess Beatrice was the 9th and final child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. She arrived into a family already swollen with titles, expectations, and rivalries. But Beatrice's fate was sealed almost immediately. Albert died when she was just 4 years old, and Victoria, crushed by grief, clung to her youngest daughter like a lifeline. Beatrice didn't just grow up in the shadow of royalty, she grew up in the shadow of mourning. As her older siblings married off to foreign courts and started families of their own, Beatrice stayed. She became her mother's constant companion, secretary, and emotional anchor. For decades, Beatrice lived a life of quiet service, transcribing Victoria's letters, organizing her papers, and fulfilling the monarch's daily rituals with unwavering devotion. The Queen even expected Beatrice to remain unmarried, assuming that no man could, or should, compete with maternal duty. But in 1885, Beatrice defied her. She fell in love with Prince Henry of Battenberg, and after a long, awkward silence, Victoria relented. The marriage was allowed, but with a catch. Beatrice and Henry would live with the Queen permanently. So they did. They had 4 children, and Beatrice, even as a wife and mother, continued her role as Victoria's closest confidant. When Henry died during a military campaign in 1896, Beatrice resumed her post at the Queen's side, wearing widowhood like inherited armor. She didn't remarry. She didn't rebel. She endured. And then, after Queen Victoria died in 1901, Beatrice took on one of the most ambitious and controversial projects in royal history, editing her mother's diaries. 40 years worth, thousands of pages. She redacted, annotated, and shaped the Queen's legacy with meticulous care and selective memory. In doing so, she became both archivist and gatekeeper of the Victorian myth, preserving the image of a woman, a monarch, and a mother through carefully curated prose. Beatrice lived into the Second World War, dying in 1944. By then, the empire had changed beyond recognition. Her siblings were gone, her children scattered. The royal world she was born into was a relic. But her influence lingered in ink, in memory, and in the bloodlines of a continent. Because this wasn't just a story of 9 royal children, it was the blueprint for a century of dynasties, disasters, and domino effects. One gene, one war, and one marriage at a time.